and welcome to the Ask More Questions podcast.
This is Scott. You've heard me probably. I think it was episode 1, right, Gene?
Episode 1.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm back. We're going to talk a little bit, but Gene, you've been talking to 15 people so far? I think we're at this stage.
Somewhere around there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty close. Yeah.
So you've been talking to a lot of people, getting their stories, hearing about their conversion experience or deconversion or deconstruction, whatever is the right word.
Whatever the term is. Yeah.
Yeah. It's been fascinating. It's been super interesting, but I think it's time to hear your story.
That's good.
So I'd love to just give you an opportunity to talk to a human as you tell everyone what your experience is, what led you to the place you are today, including what inspired you to do this podcast. A little peek behind the curtain. You and I have been talking about doing a podcast for probably ever since we met online. But it's one of those things where, if I don't have, a clear idea of where to go or bulk of time to commit to it, it just kept getting pushed to the back burner, and then you jumped on it, and I'm glad you did. So we'll just start there. I think it's let's start at the beginning. Like, what was it like for you growing up in a Christian household?
Oh, well, if I go back to the beginning, I was born a small. Never mind. I've given some thought to where it all began, and because I realize now how much of my story is more in line with the trope of I was born into it, and this is kind of a generational experience, because my mom was raised in a Baptist household, and they went to church, and Grandpa was a World War II POW and stuff like that. So like faith was like a big deal, help get through get through life. And then my dad went to Vietnam, came back, wasn't real religious necessarily. His parents were not terribly religious, but had some sort of belief. And then, they met, and the earliest I remember is probably around 6 or 7 years old, going with mom and dad to church and just being there. I've got a sister, and they took us both faithfully every Sunday, and I think a lot of that comes from I think mom was the big driver on that one, and mom was so sweet, and she knew fucking everybody, man. It was awesome. So like everywhere we went somewhere, somebody knew her, and I was like, holy crap. But
was that because you lived in a small town, or was this?
Yeah. Okay. We did live, it was like 5,000 people. So
that's small.
That's the original social network back then, was either just talk to your neighbor or the church prayer line, what they call it, a phone tree or something like that, where they would, call anyway. And I remember after attending church for a while and being brought up with it, and mom and dad would read the Bible with us and things of that nature. I remember praying the sinner's prayer by myself in my bed at night, one night. And then, shortly after that, coming back home from church, that I had told my parents that, that I believed in Jesus. And I remember my mom crying. She was tears of joy, as they would say, where you're happy, because, your baby is secure in the arms of Jesus, and so, but after that, it was, small town, like church community, went every Sunday, went Sunday morning, Sunday evening, and then there was a Wednesday service as well. So was in church a lot. Mom and dad read through the Bible with us. We prayed at night. So we'd read the Bible, and then we would say our prayers all together, very family oriented, very structured approach to just, trying to, be good Christians, I
What
guess.
did what denomination was this again?
Southern Baptist.
Southern
Yeah.
Baptist. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious. I don't want to derail us too much, but you said the sinner's prayer to yourself at, a
Yeah.
young age. How did you know what that was? Like, what was the message you were receiving that said, this is something you need to do?
Yeah. I think that is a testament to the Southern Baptist Church it's pretty heavy on making sure everyone knows about, how salvation through this view. I mean, I've interviewed enough people now that I understand that everybody has different viewpoints about how you become a Christian, but through their viewpoint of, um, you have to recognize that you're a sinner, that you believe that Jesus Christ died for our sins, rose again, and that he lives now forever, and that, with God, even though he is God, et cetera, et cetera. You know, I guess Sunday school. I think, if I were to boil it down today, I would have to say indoctrination. That, it's so well done because the Southern Baptists are pretty well structured. Um, Nothing close to Catholics. I mean, Catholics, they got everything down to a fine point, but I think Southern Baptist really wanted to try to mimic that in a lot of ways. So where if I went to another Southern Baptist denomination in another church, like if I was visiting on a weekend, which that happened every once in a while, and we still went to church even though we were in another town, there would be similar lessons or maybe similar lesson plans and things of that nature. So it was really, I would have to say indoctrination. It's just beat
Because
into you whenever you're younger.
and other denominations don't emphasize the sinner's prayer as much as some.
Hmm.
So, as you
Yeah.
said, Southern Baptists do that pretty effectively.
Yeah.
What are some of the other tools or programs that you encountered as a child growing up?
You know, uh, post post being a believer, or maybe around that time, because I remember it being around 8 years old that I became a Christian, and then we were involved in church had this thing called Royal Ambassadors, which Royal Ambassadors was kind of like um, Boy Scouts for Christians, or church, and I think there was a girls version of that too. I want to say it was called GAs, but I don't know what G stands for. I hope it wasn't girls. That would be weird. But yeah, like you would go like on a Wednesday night, Royal Ambassadors, it was me and a bunch of other, young boys. And, there was like a pledge: as a Royal Ambassador, I will do my best to something, something, something. Basically, it's funny whenever I talk about or think about this now, thinking about indoctrination, thinking about ritual and like what that plays into it, reciting things, memorizing things. Not that memorizing anything is bad, but it whenever you're young, I think it plays more of an impact on be, I keep saying beating. It sounds bad, but it's true. It's like beating the beliefs into your body, into your system. And it would be no different if I wanted to become a really good football player. You'd probably, you'd start young and you would really, learn a bunch of plays and learn different moves and things of that nature. And it's no different. It just happens to be for religion. So, but between that and then a um, healthy, active youth group, and for young kids, there's this concept of the 4 to 14 window that is well known in churches about like this is whenever we want to try to get your kids really involved in church because we want to build a healthy foundation, and which is really a healthy
And they're
foundation.
extra suggestible. Yeah.
Right, yeah, extra suggestible,
Yeah.
really moldable. If I could, have you been watching Alien Earth by chance?
I've started it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. They have this whole thing about where they could transfer consciousness from
Yeah.
humans to synthetics, and the thing that I thought was really interesting about that is that they said, "Well, we can't do this with people that aren't children because those." Whenever you get to be an adult, you already like your ideas start to become more solidified and stuff like that, And I thought,
Yeah.
and I was like, I'm hearing what you're saying. You're saying that young kids are um, moldable and impressionable, and that's how they get you. So, um, yeah, I think it's really just repetition, a strong unified message, and that's just marketing at that point, over and over and over again.
How did that start to impact your more formative years? You talked about that, was it 7 to 14, 8 to 14 window?
Hmm.
As you moved into your teens, like, how did this look? How did it change? Did it diminish? Did it increase?
Yeah, well, so there was things that we did in in church that as I got to, let's say, middle school age, like we did like these things like Bible drills. And I don't know how many people know what a Bible drill is, but you would hold a physical Bible and they would say, okay, Jeremiah 3:5. And then whoever would open it first, and then, just step up and read the verse. And between that and then getting involved in, we had like a puppet ministry that I was served at, as I got a little bit older, got into the middle school class, because I was kind of too old for the younger kids class. But middle school years is where you start to really participate a little bit more while you're still learning, right? Um, but it's also, middle school's so awkward, it's just, you're just a dork, really, and I was starting to get into things that I think were shaped a little bit by culture. So it's like a molding of my religious upbringing, but then I'm starting to get interested in things like music and games and all sorts of stuff. And some of the best stuff that I had heard from a Christian, from a friend at church, he was my best friend for a long time, and he was into this band called Petra, and and I was like, well, this is pretty cool. They had cool album covers, man. Like, I don't know, you remember any of the old Petra album covers that, like, everything looked
Yeah,
like a guitar,
absolutely.
you know?
Absolutely. Yeah. And
Yeah.
or a rocket ship, right? Wasn't
Right.
it?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I realized later they were imitating Boston, because Boston did a lot of rocket ship
Yep.
themed guitar space shit. But I thought Petra was great. And I was just such a Petra nerd. Oh my gosh.
Me
And
too.
between that and then there was like another band that was a little bit harder. They were, was it Whiteheart? Um, you know, it,
Yep.
their guitar tone was just slightly edgier, and
Dan and David Huff, the brothers who started Whiteheart and were
yeah,
very active in like country music and
really, okay,
other. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
yeah. So, you've got that. And then I remember mom would take me to this Christian bookstore down in Oklahoma. And um, I just loved going, because there was all this interesting stuff like t-shirts. I mean, I still, like, almost every day of my adult life consist of wearing some sort of, printed graphic tee, and I
Can
swear,
attest. I'm looking at one right now.
these days it's usually a band related tee, but every once in a while I might have something that's not music related, but it's few and far between. Uh, but between that and books, there was this, let's see, what was the This Present Darkness, those were all about spiritual warfare,
Yeah.
novels and
Frank
things of that
Peretti.
nature. Frank Peretti, yeah.
Yeah.
And so, um, it was just, you're developing, you're growing. But again, I'm a little awkward, I'm a little weird. I carried a New Testament around with me in my right back pocket, which is these days replaced by the wallet. So I'm sure my whole body shifts a little bit whenever I sit, because I've either had a Bible in my back right pocket, or a wallet that is probably needs to be cleaned out. Um, but yeah, you're doing that. And I wasn't really Rico Suave or anything, so it's not like I had a lot of girlfriends or anything, whenever I was in middle school. So it's pretty much, Jesus, church, youth camps, um, and then, but the thing about Petra though is that once my friend, like, once he started learning to play guitar, and then I wanted to learn to play guitar, right? And so, and then we ended up, we would play at church our own original songs, our own original Christian songs
I
that,
I have to ask, when it comes to
yeah.
Petra, are you a Greg X. Volz fan or a John Schlitt fan?
So mostly John Schlitt,
Okay.
but there are there are songs of the Greg X. Volz era that still mean a lot to me. What is it? Is it Gravedigger?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's a
They
good
had they had
song.
they had a I we're going to do a music conversation
Yes,
soon,
yeah.
hopefully, but
We're keeping it a little dialed back for this one,
yeah,
but
yeah,
yes,
but
yeah,
I have to say, Petra is a touchstone, and then there's crossover. Greg X. Volz had a solo career, and he had a couple musicians with him named Doug Pinnick and Jerry Gaskell, who went
yeah.
on to be two members of King's X,
King's
who
X, yeah,
who took Ty Tabor from guy missing his finger, the guitar player, Christian guitar player,
there's a Christian guitar player. Oh,
Phil Keaggy.
okay,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Anyway, we'll save that for a bigger conversation,
yeah,
but there's a lot of crossover between Christian
right.
music and secular music, and the business side of Christian music is a whole other conversation
Yeah, that is a whole other
that
conversation.
we'll have.
We have a special guest for that one.
Nice,
But
nice.
yeah, so but there was nothing that I really recalled um, being raised in the church during that early years and then middle school years. Nothing was really too abnormal except for one thing that really made me uncomfortable, and that was Halloween, because we start getting into the satanic panic. There was a comedian named Mike Warnke that put out a book. The Satan Seller talked about how he was a former Satanist.
Liar for Jesus, is that what you
Liar
mean?
for Jesus is
Yeah, yeah,
liar for grifting, I think, is what it
yeah,
came down to. But
yeah, yep.
and it was, I don't know. You would have to you had to be there. Is one of those things. You really had to experience the satanic panic
It
to
was
see this
wild.
mass hysteria on a country level. It was pretty. It was crazy because you would see the devil in everything. I mean, if it was a dark night in autumn, around Halloween, you would say something like, "I just feel evil everywhere." And the thing that during that time is that Halloween would come, and I got to the point where I kind of dreaded Halloween because mom and dad wouldn't let me. I question now if this was more dad than mom, but they didn't want, if I couldn't just go out and do whatever kind of costume I wanted. Now there are some early pictures of me, like really young, where I think I had a devil costume. Funny. Superman had a Superman costume, but I mean, again, we're talking 5 years old, something like that. Cute little kids, looking for, and that was before mom and dad, took another direction. But yeah, I did get to the point where I kind of hated Halloween because I didn't want to be such an outsider. Like, oh, you're going to go to school and everybody's going to have their costumes. And I remember once having a discussion where I don't remember what I wanted to be, but my parents had suggested, well, maybe you could be like Moses and carry the 10 Commandments. And
That sounds lovely.
I remember even that young thinking, this is just a terrible idea. I absolutely don't want to be Moses. I don't want to carry a staff and the 10 Commandments. And I think they ended up settling on, well, things that are not overtly grotesque looking. So Batman, things of that nature. Superman's good. Superheroes, things of that nature. So that's how I skirted around it. We didn't really do trick or treating. But
Horrible.
I know. Well, because you also had the fear that if you went to your neighbor's house, who you saw every day, that they might put razor blades in it.
Which was really part of the satanic panic, because it's
Yes.
something that
Yeah.
never happened. But
Yeah.
boy, we were afraid of it. And did your parents check your candy at the
Oh
end of the
yeah,
night.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I mean, but we got candy through other ways, right? We didn't do that, but then the local or the church that we went to, they would do something called a fall festival, and they would have things set up in the church. They had games, which was still not a bad idea. And I'll get into this a little bit later. As a young parent, I was thrilled with them because it was like a one-stop shop to get all the candy. I mean, I just appreciated the efficiency as I got
Yeah.
older. But
Well,
why
my
go
church,
why go
yeah.
door to door whenever you could just go to one
Yeah.
place and get it all?
I mean, that makes a ton of sense. My church growing up even did a haunted house. Like,
Well, but
wild.
wait a minute, was it one of those like hell houses type
Of
things?
course. Of
Oh, that's
course.
awesome.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, scare the devil out of you, right?
That's right. But they were pretty scary though.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, we have some in Kansas City, and I've
Yeah.
never been, and I would like to go this year. So
We should go and then do a
yeah.
review.
Oh, we should. That would be dope.
Yeah.
Oh
Let's do it.
man, let's do it.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll put it. Let me mark. But man, I'm gonna lose my train of thought on this one.
Sorry.
Yeah, Halloween. No, Christian rock, and then like as I start to get out of middle school, I start to get into a little bit heavier music. I think this is just a natural evolution of my musical taste and my appreciation. But of course, but a lot of it had to do with Striper, right? I remember going to middle school and, uh, Striper came out. It was kind of a big deal. You've got this band they're for Jesus, and they've got the spandex, they got the look,
The glam.
the glam, yeah.
Yeah.
And I remember there were kids that got to go to the concert, and I didn't get to go. Mom and Dad really wasn't a fan of anything too hard, which I laugh about that now, considering all of my musical styles are all over the map, but I'll listen to stuff way heavier than Striper ever wanted to be. Um, but to see that enthusiasm, for a band like Striper, you're like, I'm gonna check them out. I'm like, to hell with the devil. Oh, can you say that? I mean, I don't know. That phrase was a little bit like,
Yeah.
it was clever. I mean, oh, to hell with the devil. And I'm like,
yeah. We risk going off on a music tangent again, but Striper was really divisive in the Christian community, at least in my growing up years, because,
yeah,
for the reasons you stated, but even saying the word hell, even though you read it in the Bible, that just was pushing the edge of things. But I think something else that made them stand out too, and maybe you agree or disagree, but their musicianship, like they were actually very good. Like it's cheesy as hell, but the
if you take the
guitar
vocals
proficiency,
away,
yeah,
it's not that cheesy. And what's his name?
Which one? The
singer? Is it Robert Sweet?
Robert Sweet's the drummer.
Okay, so
yeah,
yeah,
and Michael Sweet's the singer. Oz Fox is the other guitar player, who's an incredible singer as well.
Yeah, but overall, for what they were at the time, they were top notch. I think. I mean, you couldn't have found a better band to bridge that gap between like secular glam music and Christian stuff at the same time that the Satanic Panic is going on. It was like, it's almost like we've got hope for you, and it comes in the form of yellow and black. And it was great, So I start getting into that, and like as we start to kind of like move out of the Satanic Panic by the 90s, I found it a little, even almost more awkward to be a outward culture warrior at that point. I didn't feel as comfortable wearing the Christian t-shirts anymore, but I still wore the Christian metal band shirts. I still have that, but like there were some bad ones. I mean, ones like Budweiser. It looked like Budweiser, but it was Budweiser up.
Yeah. Jesus instead of Reese's. Yeah.
This blood's for you. And you just, as you get into high school, you start looking at that stuff and going, I don't know. I kind of like the Nike one that just said, just do it. And I was simple message, not too overtly weird, but still had a pretty deep, I would say, it still had a deep faith. But it's just, and also hormones. I mean, because you've got stuff in the New Testament about like, if you even think it, then you've you've committed a sin. And I'm
That's all
like,
you do as a 14, 15-year-old boy is think
that's
about it.
all I was doing was, I mean, how could you not look at asses? I mean, let's just, I mean, they were just,
Yeah.
they looked great, you know. I just, you know, it was wonderful. You know, because just the hormones is just like, oh my
All
gosh, it's just,
consuming for
yeah,
sure.
you know. And so, um,
And how a super religious upbringing does not adequately prepare you for dealing with that stuff. You think everything you're
no,
doing and thinking and is evil and wrong and
hmm
sinful. And looking back, as a 52-year-old adult, just wish I could go back and tell my younger self, you're normal. Like
yeah,
this is normal.
right. It is normal to look at something you find, or someone that you find attractive, and to have some sort of stirring.
Sure.
Totally normal.
100%.
Um, but yeah, I mean, that is awkward. I mean, I was fortunate enough to have actual sex education in high school. I don't know what it's like these days. I'm fearful that it's not great, and it wouldn't matter anyway, because then they go to church and then probably have it shoved into them that that abstinence is the one and only way. That was starting to take off, but it wasn't as heavy as I think the younger generation after us had it. So purity culture was kind of starting to take off. You've got Josh McDowell and like True Love Waits, and going to a conference and, you know, having it beat into you over the weekend that what you really need to do with your emotions is to, you know, maybe find other outlets and just avoid this desire you might have, because desire is bad, of course, you know. So, I mean, I guess I'm fortunate for that, but at the same time, I did have this high school girlfriend, right? That kind of known her all my life. So, but she'd had a kid, and I remember
Not yours.
not mine,
Gotcha.
but she had gotten pregnant, and she told the boyfriend, and he took her back to her house, and that was it. Like, he just dropped her off. Like, I mean, not that he lived that far away, but like that reaction, she was just like, I don't really want anything to do with him. She didn't, you know. And so, but eventually we developed a relationship that was more than friends, and then I was kind of left in a weird pickle, because here I am, I'm dating a girl, and she's got a son. And even at that young age, I loved the kid. Like, I thought he was cool, you know. And I remember talking to my pastor about it, and I said, well, I don't know what to do about this. And he's like, well, you know, in the Old Testament, there's the story of Hosea, and about how he had
Oh,
you know,
Jesus.
an unfaithful spouse, and it was related to, like, it was like how God can still work in a relationship that isn't
Well, his wife was a
traditionally.
prostitute, right? Is that?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but let's ignore that part. Let's look at the bigger picture is, you know, God can use anyone in any relationship, right? So, what actually happened is that my hormones, you know, got to me, and she became the first, if you will, you know. So that was, you know, so here we are. Which, I'm not stupid now. I know that, you know, kids are going to church these days, and they're totally doing stuff like that, but they're just trying to keep it a secret, rather than probably having open, honest conversations about what's going on, and, you know, having discussions about how to do that safely and all that kind of stuff. But um I know the church is filled probably more with hypocrites these days than they ever were. But yeah, so that was a struggle. That was a thing where Christianity's weird, right? Because, you know, you have this emphasis on how people do bad things, but then there's also this emphasis that you can also be forgiven, even if you screw up. Just come back. That's the main thing. And I kind of wrestle with it, and then eventually I did get to a point uh, where I got really convicted of that, and didn't do that anymore. That being sex, that was outside of marriage. And as I got into college, you know, I moved out uh, around 20 years old. Moved in with a cop, actually. So that was, yeah.
A choice.
Yeah, yeah, in college together. We had some classes together, and he worked part-time as a cop, but he also was studying criminal justice, you know. So,
Got it.
yeah, so that was fun. Let's just say that I we did target practice. We lived in the country, so we did target practice a lot. So can't go wrong with there, you know. Uh, but but yeah, like that was that period where now you're on your own, right? Like you got to figure out what it is that you truly believe. And I wasn't too far away from where I grew up. It was like half an hour, but like I still wanted to find a church, and so I looked around and you know, found some churches that were kind of more geared toward the college kids. But one of the big things that happened during that time was also finding some musicians to create a band. So one of them I knew, and then the drummers. I didn't have a long history with the drummers, which is funny because, side note, I went and saw Spinal Tap last night, and the running joke on Spinal Tap is about how all the drummers died. But but yeah, so you know, I had a bass player, guitar player that I knew. You know, found a drummer. First, we had a Christian thrash metal band. Yeah, it was heavy stuff. And then eventually kind of backed away from that after grunge killed everything, that we got a little bit more into like alternative rock. But then we became more of a band of Christians because I don't know, that kind of seemed how the industry was going, where things were kind of toning it down a little bit on
Trying to be
uh,
more mainstream.
a little bit more mainstream, more acceptable. You know, if I think about how like the Newsboys back then were a lot more digestible and kind of like branching out, and
DC
we were
Talk, Jesus
DC
Freak,
Talk, yeah, yeah. I mean, those were,
Creed,
you know,
even,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So I mean, you know, these are bands that have Christian members in them, and that's whenever you start to accept the pluralist
Right.
society a little bit. You're like, well, I'm probably going to work with some people that I'm not always going to be around Christians all the time, and so but won a battle of the bands with our
Nice.
Christian hard rock, you know, alt rock, whatever you want to call it, band, you know. So and that was, you know, that kind of makes you think about like your future, like, oh, maybe I'm going to do something like that. But I mean, it was still Christianness was the core of it. We would pray before band practice, you know, even though we weren't necessarily going out and throwing Bibles into the audience, you know. It was still it was a big deal to us, you know. And then uh I'm doing all that, and then eventually I get out of college, and I got to find a job, and I move away to from my conservative upbringing to a liberal college town, right? And this was also a point in time where I mean, I moved to a new place. I don't know anyone, and I didn't really. I think I was just burnt out from college and everything. Getting out of a relationship that really wasn't working because of the distance and things of that nature. And you know, so I kind of didn't go to church at all. But then I got to this point. I still remember my big ass Bible set on my bed frame. You know, it was still there. You know, and still, you know, occasionally read it. But I really wasn't going to church. But then I got to the point where I was just like, I really need community. You know, I need to go get involved, and I know the church is a way I could do that. And maybe I should maybe stop being such a loser here, because I really felt like my life wasn't going. Um, I mean, I packed up everything and moved to a new place, and I didn't have any of my old structures or anything like that. And I thought maybe church. So I looked around at a few of them, and some of them were kind of weird. Um, but eventually found one that it seemed pretty nice. It was like an old Catholic church, and they were non-denominational, which was kind of new for me. But I figured out that they were just Baptist that had a band, and I mean, you know, because belief wise, they were still pretty held to everything that I grew up with, the core doctrines. Um, and just got involved, you know, started playing in the band a little bit, and you know, helping out, and then eventually I met my wife, and
At the church or no?
no, online. So this was back in the days of Yahoo chat rooms. So that was, they just had like, you could filter, you could dig your way down into like Kansas, and then like you could get into like nearby cities. And so, I talked to her for a long time before. Actually, I should go back a little bit. So before, like in the in between of whenever, I got first moved to Lawrence, Kansas, and then meeting my wife, I did move in with these three other guys that were all from back home. And so one, you know, didn't really have much of a strong faith. The other one was Assemblies of God, if I remember correctly, but he was pretty left leaning. And then the other guy was Catholic, and they're all younger than me.
Left-leaning Assemblies of God.
Yeah, he was
I'm
more
not even
Democrat.
sure what that would look like. Hellfire and brimstone,
Yeah.
but I don't know.
Yeah, I think his Assemblies of God. I could be wrong. I'll have to ask him next time. But I talked to him. But he cared a lot about social issues. Was a big deal for him. But we had amazing debates during this time period. We were kind of talking about our faith at the same time. We had a bar. We had a pretty nice bar in the house. So it was, a little bit of, start to shift a little bit in how strict you're going to be about things. But we would have debates about Catholics and Mary and speaking in tongues and Benny Hinn and all sorts of wild things. And what's great about that is that they challenged me, I challenged them. I think we all walked away with some different questions about ourselves that we hadn't really asked before, and so that was really good. That set me up for the future. Little did I know. um, anyway, and then after that, met the wife. We One of the things we talked about in the early days was the importance of being on the same page. The Bible would call that equally yoked. But being on the same page whenever it came to belief, and like, so she thought it was important to be with someone that believed in God. That was important to her, because she couldn't see how somebody couldn't believe in God. Um, and even though she wasn't like super religious, she came from more liberal theology, where her emphasis was on love and mine was more on fire and brimstone. And so we dated, and then got married in the church. We would do Sunday school. I remember being a stickler about Jonah and the big fish, because it wasn't a whale. And if a kid would say whale, I would correct them and be like, that's not what the word says. The word says, let's read it here, open, and so,
Wow.
you're reading about Jonah and the big fish. Wasn't a whale. Doesn't say a whale. And so, but the church that we attended, there was this, like co-pastor there, and his name was Paul something. And Paul, was really well studied, and he kind of, challenged me even more about getting even deeper. And so around this time, I started getting into like Christian apologetics, buying a big fat ass biblical encyclopedia, which is sitting on my desk right over here. It's huge, and looking at the pictures, learning about the Holy Land, like in your head, you're like, one of these days, I hope to go to Jerusalem. That's the kind of thing. Listening to, we've talked before about the Bible Answer Man, Hank Hanegraaff, listening to a lot of Christian radio, just absorbing by choice, all of this stuff. Was I listening to Christian?
You may have listened to me because I worked in Christian radio in Kansas City.
That's wild. Yeah, I probably did. And I probably said, man, that guy's got a great voice.
Someday I'm going to do a podcast with him.
Yeah. And so, and then we had kids, right? And it's the same story for anyone who has kids. You're tired, you're exhausted, but the one thing that you want to do, you want to raise your kids right. And what I was taught was that, that was in the church. And so why wouldn't I naturally, we did dedications with the kids. Wasn't a baptism, because obviously kids can't make that choice. So but we stood up there with, our parents and the pastors and said, we're going to raise our children, um, in a God centered family. And that was a big deal to us. Now we're gonna do a callback to Halloween, to fucking Halloween, man. So,
because now you have kids and
because
trick
now
or
I have
treating.
kids,
Yes.
and I have kids, and for whatever reason, one year when the girls were young, um, my mom sends a package. She's like, well, because sometimes we would, so they lived 3 hours away. So we would drive halfway and like do a kid exchange. And then the wife and I would have like a weekend to ourselves, which was always nice. And, usually they'd come back with some sort of crap because my mom loved buying stuff for the grandkids. And yeah, so I can get these bags, right? And these bags are filled with Halloween shit. And we're talking
Oh,
bats and
oh
witches'
no.
hats
The
and
stuff you couldn't
the
have.
stuff that I couldn't have. But for the grandkids, knock yourself out, right? And I'm confused, right? And you know what really bothers me is I never asked my mom, what the hell was up with that?
Really? That never
Yeah,
came up.
I no, it never did. I don't recall that we ever had a deep conversation about, so why was I not allowed to like do this? And this is why I think maybe dad was more the driver of that,
Well,
like
do you suspect that your parents maybe had a trajectory similar to yours? Were they moving away from
no.
religious dogma at all? No. Okay.
Oh, dogma? Well, that's different. They still have their faith, but they might have um yeah, I don't know. It's a big question mark because I think that little kids can make you do anything and buy all sorts of shit. So, like, you know, I I think they just wanted their grandkids to be happy. That's what
Okay.
I think what it really came down to it. And so I would reluctantly trick or treat with them, reluctantly a little bit, just in the neighborhood, but I was still mostly focused on doing the trunk or treats because, again, this really had more to do with efficiency. I mean,
Right.
you could go to a church parking lot
Yeah.
and have all of these. I remember there was one not far from our house in Lawrence, and it was a big church, right? So they had a big parking lot, and there were so many cars, and you could just go, to all of these, and within 10 minutes, you get to see a bunch of people dressed up in costumes, which is lots of fun, and then you get you're full. You've got all the candy for the night. You're well set. So, but it's still, that's kind of where you start looking at things a little differently. Like, well, that wasn't fine for me, but it's fine for them. And now as a parent, I have to wrestle with what I'm supposed to do. I don't know. Is the devil really bad and Halloween's the most evil of all the holidays? Um, yeah, it still kind of blows my mind to think about
Mm-hmm.
it.
And the
Um,
irony that statistically your children were more at risk in a church than they were wandering the neighborhood.
oh, sure, because I was with them wandering the neighborhood. They were
Right.
never out of my sight, but whenever
Right.
I was at church, I mean, there was at least periods of time whenever they were with somebody else that I had to just trust, right? So, yeah, that was just difficult to reconcile. And then, but we still go along. I'm still really into apologetics, learning a lot of things, getting deeper. We started a home church at one point, actually with the Assemblies of God, which may not have been Assemblies of God, but like he, um, we were on the same wavelength, like with a little bit of a disconnect with church a little bit. We kind of felt like maybe it didn't fully meet what we were looking for. So we're like, well, where two or more are gathered in God's name, then that's still church, right? So why don't we just get together with some friends of ours that we like, and we'll read from the Bible, and We wanted to be more authentic, so we would buy actual wine, because I always thought that was a little bit of a cop out, that the Southern Baptists were like usually just did grape juice. And I'm like, it doesn't say grape juice. It didn't say well, and it doesn't say grape juice. So, I wanted to get more, closer to grassroots, like early church stuff. And so we did that for a while, and then that kind of, played out. But like as the kids got older, and and one of the kids we were um realized after she got into school that there was maybe some sort of learning disability, right? And we couldn't really figure out what it was, but we ended up going to at the University of Kansas. They had like the students, so like they do their little kind of quasi practice type thing. They still had guidance, but we talked about how didn't have a we suspected ADHD, but we weren't really sure. And then we go through a couple of sessions. And one of the things that came up was spanking, about discipline, right? And we talked about like spanking particularly. And I'm ashamed now to say that, we did some spanking. It was never terrible, like super hard. But there was still that whole, like, you had a paddle and you had this threat of discipline, because that's what I was raised with. I certainly got a few spankings over
Me
time,
too.
because I mean,
With a belt or without?
no, never with a belt.
Oh, boy.
Never had to pull my pants down or anything sad like that.
I was black and blue.
Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry.
It's terrible.
Yeah,
Terrible.
yeah. So but I remember, here this kid is, he doesn't have a master's degree, he's working on it, and he's like, the data that we have at this point seems to indicate that spanking doesn't work, and that it's actually more akin to abuse. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, now I'm wrestling with train a child the way he should go, and he'll never depart
Sparing
from
the
it.
rod.
Yeah, and I'm dealing with that in this office in front of him, like mentally having a little bit of a breakdown. Like, but they're like, but we have this evidence that says that it doesn't work, or it's not effective and it is abusive. And he's like, he just asked me point blank. He's like, "Do you find spanking to be effective?" And I said, "No, I
Great
don't."
question.
Yeah, and he said, "Well, you might consider other methods." I said,
What a great approach.
"Yeah, I know." And we didn't spank the kids anymore after that. Like, that was it. We were just like, the evidence suggests that we shouldn't do that and that it's abusive. And I never, ever want to harm my children, ever. And I realize now I probably did inadvertently. So, I mean, I'm sorry. And yet, like, it wasn't black and blue, nothing like that. But yeah. And so whenever I'm asked, when did the deconversion start? I don't know, because I think about little steps along the way.
Yeah, because you and I have actually talked about this informally, and you've never mentioned that, but that sure sounds like the beginning. Like, this thing that I was taught my entire life, or Halloween, or music,
music. Yeah. I mean,
lots of little triggers.
Or when Paul, the guy that I talked about, that was really challenging, whenever he said, "Well, I believe in predestination, but I don't believe in double predestination." And I thought, well, that's interesting, because I think that I could make an argument for, for double predestination from the Bible. And so that's Christianese. So predestination means that, God kind of like selects people that he's going to be his children. And the double predestination is that God actually selects people to do evil. And he wasn't down with that. He wasn't down with the idea that God would create somebody for the sole purpose of doing evil, just so that way God could accomplish his own will.
The problem of evil always creates, tension.
Yeah. And so he wasn't down with that, but I'm like, "No," in my head, I'm like, "No, I think I could totally make the case that God has done this." But those are finer points that gets argued about and goes nowhere, you know?
Or creates entirely separate denominations. So the fact that the
That's
Christian
true.
faith is
Yeah.
not a unified monolith might be the strongest evidence that it's all up to how you interpret it.
Right, yeah. You know, the thing about moving to a more liberal town and then, like, getting married, having kids is that I start internally seeing a shift away from hellfire and brimstone to one of treating people better, loving people. I still wrestled with the hellfire brimstone part, but, just really starting to see that even if somebody didn't believe the same way that I did, that that doesn't mean they're not still human and still worthy of love, and as we continued to, just go through life, eventually we moved to Kansas City because I got tired of commuting, and then we had to find a new church, and it was kind of different then because at that point we had our third and final kid, a boy, and you're thinking about, it's always about the kids, right? It's always like, I just want to do what's right for the kids. And so whenever we would look at churches, well, the kids ministry was a big deal because we wanted to make sure they were safe, wanted to make sure they were learning proper Christian teachings, which means that I would end up asking a lot of questions and reading the literature that the church had about, like, oh, what we believe, um, and so that was just really the primary focus, was just children, and then secondarily, something for the wife and I to plug in, so we ended up finding a church that we we were on the fence. It was church A and church B, right? And church A looked like they had an awesome kids ministry. Frankly, their whole kids area looked so fun. I kind of wanted to just like hang out in there. It had like fake trees and looked like the wilderness and stuff like that. It was pretty dope. And then and church B was more like the church when we left Lawrence, that they were a church in a box type of situation. And so, um, but they were, I don't know. There's something about him that I like just a little bit more, and I don't know why. I couldn't tell you that now. But we ended up going with Church B to be the regular church. My oldest kid was baptized there, which was actually in the pool behind the school that was rented, and I got really involved in the church band there. We ended up having a small group because their whole thing was about replication. So it's like, you grow, and even the small groups were kind of designed to replicate. But our small group was pretty much people all of our same age that had, maybe had a kid, maybe didn't, maybe had a couple kids, but we met in our townhouse. We had a rented duplex. Sorry, I called townhouse. So that a townhouse is just what people who rent or own duplexes call it to make it sound better. So we're in our duplex, and we'd have people come over. The kids would play downstairs in the basement, and the adults would stay upstairs. We would talk about heavy shit too, and we had a rule, like if the kids come up, we just kind of like go silent, because we wanted a safe space for adults to be able to talk about grown up
Interesting.
things. Yeah. So which I actually kind of appreciated. Uh, because whenever the kids are always around you, you're kind of like, oh, I need a safe space. So you talk about all sorts of things, and talk about the sermon, and we would bring food. We would have like a little tiny like buffet, that everybody brought something. It was it was community. It was great. It was a small community just within our age group, but really fully enjoyed that. And then at one point, something bad happened, which was my mom died. Oh, my mom, such mama's boy. I mean, even though she stabbed me in the back with the whole Halloween thing, I was, I was deeply broken after. after she died. Went into pretty big depression. And I remember the day that I came home the weekend after her funeral, and I pulled into the driveway of our townhouse, and I looked up in the sky, and I still have that picture on my phone. It was clouds that to me resembled an angel, you know? So I'm in a highly emotional state, and I see a cloud, and I think it's an angel, and I'm like, oh, yeah. And after I went to some therapy, got past the depression, and then kind of doubled down on God a little bit more because just kind of want to be ready to see, your loved ones later, right? And went into just got more involved with the band at church, and which also meant that you were there early in the morning to set up and stay after church to tear down, and continued on with the home group, small group thing. And I say all that to say is, you know I hear so many stories like, oh, something bad happened to you and that's why you left your faith. It's like, actually something bad happened to me, and I kind of leaned in a little harder at that point. Oh, church hurt? No. Every church I attended, yeah, sure, like every place I've ever worked, had some people that I might have had some disagreements with. But
But you're just
um
mad at God, though. That's why you.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, wasn't mad at God, none of that
Mhm.
stuff. Like well, we'll get to that. That's maybe a little bit. But that's before I stopped believing in him, not after. But
Yeah,
you
right.
know, I but I had good church experiences. I had good Christian experiences for the most part. I don't recall, you know, being just so upset with God. Although when the pandemic hit a couple years after my mom died, then I started to really kind of see a change in people. It started off good, right? And my small group, we still met. We did Zoom things, like a Zoom call once a week, and then as things opened up, we would meet outside. Sometimes we'd go to Sonic and like hang out in the parking lot with our lawn chairs. So I appreciated that about them, but there were plenty of other believers that I saw being just the most selfish son of a bitches that I'd ever seen in my life. Like they they couldn't like it didn't seem to me like they were truly looking out for caring for their neighbor, not caring for their sick. Not all of them, I get it, but there was enough that I started to see kind of a just a little bit too driven by politics and a lot less driven by any kind of belief in Jesus. And that really gave me pause. It didn't necessarily shake my faith. It just made me mad at some of the other believers. I'm like, what the hell's wrong with you people? This
Uh-huh.
isn't Christian. And so, we get through the pandemic, and about 20, I'd have to look at the date because it all feels like a blur these days, but around 2022, I think my dad was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, because my sister had noticed some things and was concerned. And again, dad was a big driver um, in my upbringing and my church life. Dad was a deacon in the church, which is an elder for other denominations, so highly devoted. I remember so many times that um, I had walked through the house and came across dad, and he was sitting at the table reading, maybe after lunch, or sitting in the bathroom reading the Bible while he did his business. And and it made impression of me, that he was deeply devoted to his faith. And the problem of evil to me is on par, but maybe lower for me, about the problem of suffering. Like, I get the whole free will, fallen world argument. That's fine. If you come to me with that, I don't care. Like, I have children now there is nothing that my children could do that would make me want them to be tortured in any way, shape, or form. Even if they killed somebody, I would be very conflicted and be like, well, yeah, you shouldn't have done that. And that's wrong. And that's not good either. But I would still love them because they were my child, right?
Right.
And if they're listening to this, no, that is not an excuse to go hurt anybody. Uh, so get that disclaimer out of the way right now.
At least have it on record for the trial. Yeah.
Right. But I mean, you've probably thought about this, right? There are people
Sure.
that they've gone to trial and their relatives, maybe a son, maybe a parent, are on trial. And how conflicted, I mean, they're just kind of along for the ride at that point because they got to see how the justice system plays out. But they're probably,
Well, without going into any details, we're in the middle of that right now. Not with a child, but
yeah.
it is. There is an element of I feel guilt by association, just the fact that we're family, but also they're family. So, you love them still,
Yeah. Like I want you to be rehabilitated in that case, or I want you to be fixed. But I don't want you to be tortured forever. I would far better you like have a heart change, so to speak, rather than to be tortured forever. And I wrestled with that with my dad because I'm like, no, he was the faithful servant. Why are you allowing him to suffer like this? Because Alzheimer's has got to be, in my opinion, one of the worst. Just because once
for the family, for the person suffering, it seems like a mercy.
Yeah. I there were just points where in the early days, like he was really frustrated, like because he couldn't remember something.
He was aware that he had something.
Oh yes, yeah. He was aware. He knew, and he was cognizant enough that since my sister was geographically closer, she took care of a lot of the logistics of the day to day, and he made arrangements with her because he was also still taking care of his mom, and he made arrangements. He's like, if I get to a point where I can't do this anymore, we're going to draw up some stuff. And then his legal documents that required one of his brothers to kind of take over for the care of his mom. And then my sister would take over for his care. And so, and yeah, he was aware of it. And I kind of wish I'd have had that discussion about are you mad about this with God or anything like that? He kind of just kept going. I never heard him say anything about disparaging about God during that time. But, it was kind of a slow decline. But then we had a good Christmas that year in 2022. He masked it pretty well. If he was hiding it, he did a great job masking. And then 2 weeks later, he caught COVID for the first time. And then this kind of ties back into the selfishness of other people, because after he got COVID, it really exacerbated his Alzheimer's. And the physicians said that. They said, yeah, we've seen this in patients with Alzheimer's, that they get COVID and things just get way worse quickly. And his doctor even said, I've never seen a decline happen this quickly. Within 6 months, we had to put him into assisted living facility. And then shortly after that, he had to go into memory care, where he stayed, for until he died. Actually, the last month he's in nursing home, but most part, he wasn't on his own anymore, right? And it was during this time, if you want to hang your hat on some big boogeyman, then it was during this time that I just didn't understand how God could allow someone who, in my eyes, was so faithful, so full of integrity, so annoyingly so, wasn't quite Ned Flanders, but kind of,
Ted Lasso.
Ted Lasso.
Yeah.
So, very, I just didn't understand, and so I started asking God. I'm like, "Why? Why would you allow this to happen to anyone?" Now I'm experiencing this firsthand, but why would you allow this to happen to anyone? Like me, fine, that's fine, I'm no saint, but, like, I just thought dad made a really concerted effort to do this all my life, and, um, started really asking those questions, and we still had our small group that we were going to. After the pandemic, we kind of changed because the church that we had the small group with that we would attend with the kids, they didn't really have a good high school program. So we ended up going to the other church that had the great kids ministry, and you know, we thought it was fine. So my wife and I would go there during the morning, and then we would still have our small group at night. And from the old church, so kids church in the morning, small group at night for adults, which was just my wife and I, and I would talk openly about this because these people had seen me go through the death of my mom and like how we dealt with all of this, and then I'm like, I'm starting to question a lot of things, and they're like, it's okay to have questions. There's nothing wrong with having questions. I'm like, great, So I mean, everybody was, I still showed up every Sunday. I mean, for the most part, we would go around, we'd have prayer requests and all this kind of stuff. And I'm just asking questions, like things I don't understand anymore, like why God allows this kind of suffering to happen. And then you start thinking about other kinds of suffering. Why, like one of the things that I later heard, about free will and fallen world, original sin, like what, like an animal breaks its leg in the wilderness, right? Well, that's okay. Well, that happened because of, original sin. But what did it learn from it? Did it learn anything from its broken bone that killed it? No. What's my dad going to learn from this experience as he loses his mind? Like there's nothing here to take home and be like, well, I'm supposed to pray without ceasing and praise God in all circumstances, including losing my mind, and I don't remember praising God 5 minutes ago anyway. I was the lesson for me because the lesson for me at this point is, well, you're kind of a dick. I mean, as far as as far as God goes, and I just it was probably a good solid year of me getting continually frustrated with not getting answers. I would fast, I would pray, I would read the Bible, still involved in the church band, but I was kind of like, these songs are ringing a little bit more hollow these days. Oh, I'm sorry, no. Um not the church band, the going to church and singing the songs, and I'd be like, these songs were these they're feeling hollow because at some point you kind of like look around and you're like, oh, what are we singing to, and then it just got to the point I'm like, listen, God, I need to know that you're there. I need something. You got to show me something. Just come on, man, and I got to the point where I'm like, I guess I'm gonna have to, do some more research like I've always done in the past. Just, you know, see what else is out there. And everything I looked for online, like as far as answers, they were only Christian answers, and they all came from an apologetics viewpoint. And again, I've already been into apologetics, so I'm like, I kind of like already know all these. I've heard all these arguments before, and they're clearly not helping me try to understand the nature of what's going on here.
You had to break the algorithm both
Yeah. Oh
digitally
boy.
and
And yeah,
analog.
that's
Yeah.
a great yes. I had several analogs working or algorithms working against me. Um, I found a new one in a wonderful little website called the YouTube, and YouTube. I can't remember what I searched for. I've tried to go back in my search history and find that exact phrase, but I think it was something along the lines of, "How do we know that God actually exists?" And that led me down a different path. I found these debates. by these atheists. Now, I think whenever you became an atheist was kind of around the time of new atheism, that whole
Yeah.
new atheism 2010-ish.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Sort of the height of it. Even went to like
Yeah.
an atheist concert before I had really identified a concert conference.
I was going to say,
Yeah.
what?
Yeah. Before I had even identified yet, because I was sort of in a similar spot. Like, what else
Yeah.
is out there? What happens if I'm not afraid to question my faith?
Oh, what
Yeah.
if I'm
Yeah.
not afraid? Just hypothetical,
Yep. Yep. Yep.
Yeah, that's huge mental personal permission. And I guess I was already there because I'm like, I'm not getting any answers anywhere else. So might as well, put that in there. And then I find these debates, right? Like, you know, Hitchens and Dillahunty and going against like Jordan Peterson and Alex O'Connor with Dinesh D'Souza, who he just completely destroys. I mean, I like a good match, right? Like everybody likes a good game story, right? It's like whenever the Chiefs won the Super Bowl and the 49ers were down and they were celebrating early and then the Chiefs end up coming back and winning the Super Bowl. It's like I love that kind of plot. It's great. And then I'm watching these people that don't believe at all just wipe the floor in debate with people that are prominent believers. And the other thing is that they make sense. And I'm like, well, if these guys are so bad, because I was always kind of taught that like an atheist was a bad person. If you didn't believe in God, the Bible, has different verses, a few of them talking about non-believers and about how they're evil or they're fools, you know, professing to be wise. Anyway, so I am watching these guys and I'm just really enamored, and then eventually the algorithm takes me to a new place, which are former believers that were probably about as studied as me or more, like they went on to school and actually, dove into this stuff. And, for their degree, and then they left after they learned more information. And one of them that I really liked, Apologia, he had some pretty good videos, and one of the ones that um, kind of probably the nail in the cross. Anyway, the it was and I should back up just a little bit that I'd also poked around with some books. Like I'd read this one book by a Jewish woman who she was raised Jewish, and then as she got older, Kate Cohen is her name. She decided that she didn't believe in this anymore, and then found this just a self-published Kindle book called I think I wrote that down. Something about all that's wrong with the Bible. Yeah. And it listed a lot of contradictions. And the way I was raised is that you always check out everything. Even always had your Bible open at church, because what if the preacher's telling you something wrong? Like, let's be suspect of literally everything. Let's just make sure that we're reading the right thing. I found a couple of typos. He was off on a couple of things, but there was a lot of it that I'm like, I'm having a hard time not or reconciling these contradictions. And he would even go into like footnotes about like, oh yes, even this commentary says that this is a contradiction. And I'm like, well, that's interesting. So anyway, fast forward. I didn't dive too much into books at that point. I think I'd read enough books on things that YouTube was a far more entertaining display. But these are long videos where they go into things and they give references and they, so I can continue to do other research. It's just I'm not accepting it at face value. I just dig, right? But Paul had this guy on, Dr. Josh Bowen, and they're doing a reaction video to because Paul was Mennonite and former believer, and Josh Bowen was also like really really deep into high control religions, and had was going on to school, going to theological school, seminary, whatever, to to learn more about ancient text. And and they were doing a reaction video to the archaeological finds of the of the Bible, and they were talking about Noah and the flood story, and then they were talking about the Epic of Gilgamesh, and that there's a flood myth story. I didn't really know a lot about the Epic of Gilgamesh or anything about some of those. There's a few others like Enuma. I'm going to say that name wrong. Enuma Elish, something like that, where it's there's Code of Hammurabi. These are
Big
all,
one. Yeah.
yeah. So these are all older. These are texts that are older than the Bible, which, I kind of thought the Bible was the oldest book in the Bible because I wasn't told anything differently. And never clearly investigated it on my own. If I had just done a little research, I would have found out that no, that's not true. Or there would have probably been some apologetics for it to explain why the Bible's still true, even though this stuff is older. But one of the things in this story was about the text is that the Epic of Gilgamesh, the writer of whoever wrote the Noah story, used a word for bitumen/pitch, which is the sealant to make it waterproof, used a word from the older text, even though Hebrew at that time had another word to describe that type of sealant, right? Purposely chose to use the much older, and by much older, I mean anywhere between 500 to 1,000 years older.
Talking archaic at that point.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. And then it's one of those things where I was like, late at night, I'm watching these videos and I backed it up and I'm like, what did he say? What was that? And I had to back it up and watch it like a few times, just that little clip, for it to really make sense to me, because I understood, because I'm a former journalist. I once wrote a story about plagiarism, and I made that connection. I was like, holy fucking shit. It's all made up, because if the Old Testament isn't right, if it's all just a story, then that kills the three Abrahamic religions right off the bat, right? I mean, it kills Judaism, it kills Islam, and it kills Christianity. And then Christian, I mean, Jesus doesn't even matter at that point, because if Jesus is pointing, the story of Jesus is pointing to the Old Testament, supposedly, it doesn't matter. This is not true. To me, it was a smoking gun. Other people I have found, I've talked to plenty of other people, they are not as impressed. And that's why I've learned that everybody has their thing, right? But for me, it was looking at finding out that, yeah, this story is much older, and it's just passed down over time, and then it gets changed. And there's a word for that in religion called syncretism, where it's just how religions kind of evolve. So religions evolve too, just like people.
How about that?
Yeah,
because religion is a function of society. I mean, it
has been,
and very effective.
It continues to be, unfortunately. So, but at that point, I'm like, well, I guess I'm agnostic then. There's no way I could be sure that there's a God. But I didn't want to give up on it yet, though. It's so part of you, right? And I think that lasted about 2 weeks, because I continued to read the Kindle book, go through it. I remember one day just being shutting the book, closing the Bible, and I'm like, yeah, he's right. This stuff doesn't make any sense, but surely there's a God, right? But then I start learning more about epistemology, the study of knowledge, the theory of knowledge, how we know what we know to be true. And I'm really digging that. That's really cool. So it's not based on feelings. It's not based on how you were raised. It goes by well, let's come up with some tools to really ask a lot of questions to get down to the root of what do I know is true. And a guy at work, I can't escape how music has had such an important part of my life, both in my belief and in my unbelief, because I go to work and I'm still kind of like in this weird mumbo jumbo agnostic state, the whole long 2 weeks that it was there. And I really hadn't talked to even my wife much about this. She knew I was frustrated, but I don't think I'd gotten to the point where I said, I don't know that God even exists anymore. But I mean, I was going to church and being unhappy and being like, are we singing to anybody here? What's going on? I don't know. And so uh, this guy at work, he's like, hey, man, I don't know about this band Sleep Token. I'm like, I have no idea who you're talking about. He's like, it's this hot new thing, and the kids are into it, and they say it's metal, but I don't think it's metal. And I'm like, well, me, I like metal, and he's like, I said, I tell you what, this is a Friday, I said, I'll give it a listen over the week, and I'll come back. um, and I come back, I'm like, dude, I am such a fan. Like, these
They're
guys are
amazing.
amazing. They're amazing. So I continue to listen to them, and then, I just remember one night I'm walking, so in Missouri, QTs I mean, there's a war between Casey's and QT about which one is the better convenience store, which that whole sentence is about the lamest sentence I've ever said
Right.
in my whole life. But yes, but if you're in Kansas City, you know that you're serious about your convenience stores. And so, and I don't live that far away from a QT, and I go up there quite a bit. And during the pandemic, hell, that was exercise. So, so I walk a few blocks up. It's a nice night. I'm listening to Sleep Token. And there's this lyric. I'm halfway to my house. Night's dark. And it says, we are exhausted by all this pretending. And it broke me. Because I realized I couldn't deal with trying to pretend that any of this was real anymore. And it just felt like everything was a lie. Everything that I'd believed and all the pain that I'd endured with watching Dad just deteriorate. Sorry, I didn't anticipate a total breakdown. But not unlike that night, I collapsed just on the top of the hill, just bent over, my hands on my knees. And I'm like, I'm exhausted by pretending that any of this is real because I can't do this anymore. And I'm like, I find no evidence that there is a God at all. And, I was no saint. I wasn't exactly like running a church or anything, but I'm your everyday person raising kids, like living our lives, right? We're working, we're living our lives, we're going through life. But then there's this whole other thing that you're like, it's in your head all the time and you can't get away from it. And it's just like, it's not real. None of this is true. So I make it home, and I tell the wife, I'm like, I'm not agnostic. I said, I'm an atheist. I don't believe in God at all. There's just nothing. She's like, wow. Like, it's like, okay. I knew, and then she's like, so what does this mean? What are we doing? I'm like, I don't know.
And this was about a year ago?
Yeah, 2024, July. Actually, that was probably closer to June, like late June. No, I'm sorry. The latter part of June was me like figuring stuff out. But then like July 15th, I was like officially telling people. But I had to have the talk with other people first. Talked with the wife, and then I talked with came out to my oldest. Actually, she was the one who said, "Oh, this is like coming out." And I'm like, "Oh, you kids and your slogans." But she was right. It was because everyone, my whole life, everything I've ever known, like centered around some form of church and people, And she That was great though, because now I could finally have a normal ass conversation with my kid without the obstruction of some religious construct floating around the back of my head. Because she was so thrilled. She was like, "Oh, that's great." She's like, "Because I hated going to church, and I don't think that this." She's like, "I'd consider myself agnostic, I guess, because it's just I mean, we're talking about a kid who believed, baptized, and all that kind of stuff,
Was that a
and she
surprise to you? Like, did you have any idea that she felt that way?
not terribly surprised. No.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, um, you know, and then ended up having to tell my small group, that been through all this stuff together, and we were on a bit of a break, but then we came back and had that discussion, and that was uncomfortable. It didn't go as well as I'd hoped, and in my head, I'd came prepared. I was told to come prepared with like, well, come prepared. By the guy whose house we were at, he encouraged it. He was like, I don't think this necessarily has to be a bad thing. He's like, come and tell us what you've learned. I'm like, okay. And so I came with like 3 sheets of stuff that I'd spent time, I'm like, I wanted to have it all laid out for you. And th- mm, no, it first started off with one of the other men there had a thing about like creation basically was the big hang up for him,
Uh,
and he's like, well, evolution's just a theory. I grabbed his phone and dropped it on the floor, and I said, gravity is just a theory. I wasn't well versed then.
yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
know what I know now.
Gravity's a law, just to be clear.
I'd have I'd have I'd have different answers if that conversation
Sure.
were to happen today. But I at one point, after the tension broke, we decided, kind of like, the guys went outside and we were just chatting, getting, and like the women stayed inside, and they kind of broke apart just for a little while to, have their individuals, because I'm sure they were all like asking her, I should ask her about that actually, but I'm sure they were like, so are you okay with this or all that kind of
Right.
stuff? I think there was some of that discussion. And at one point, one of the guys outside, they're talking, but I said, he'll be back, and I'm like, oh no, you don't get it. You don't get what I just went through. You don't get the torture and the mental anguish that I went through to get to this point, because it's not like this is something I wanted. I
Right.
tried to stay.
Right.
I just got to a point where belief just got up and walked away, and then I had to make a conclusion. And the conclusion is, I find no evidence that God actually exists at all. I find no evidence that this isn't anything more than outside of my imagination. I find no evidence that this isn't anything more than perpetuated like an illness, through generations after generations until it creeps into society. And I can't find any evidence for any of this being true. And then after that, I mean, like a week later, I wrote a letter to everybody in the group, and I said, thank you so much. I don't think I can come back. Wife was on board with that. So, um, and then but I was still committed that if the kids still wanted to go to church, I would still go. I would take them. I would go with them because, they had their kids' church thing. So we go to St. Louis one weekend. Because one of the big things, it was just a weekend vacay with the family, right? Needed to get some St. Louis style pizza, and had to get some gooey butter cake, which I didn't realize is also available at QT 2 blocks away. And but one of the things we did was go to the science center, and they had a T-Rex display. That was the reason it was special. Like, it was floating through, and they had this display.
Was
Because
it
one of the
Sue, the T-Rex?
no,
Because
no.
that was at Union Station in Kansas City for a
Yeah, I don't
while.
think this was Sue. No, I'd
Okay.
have to look through my pictures.
Hmm.
But because one of the things that did kind of didn't help during this process was my son, who is a little more nerdy than I think other kids. I think he's a little special. But he was like, how come there are no dinosaurs in the Bible? And I was just like, I don't know. Like at that time, I was still, deconstructing. I'm like, I don't know. We'll find the answer later. You know, I don't know what that answer is, but I know that you're absolutely correct. There's no way I can contort enough apologetics to try to make you believe that there are dinosaurs in the Bible. But anyway, but at this point, right, I'm atheist now, and I'm looking at a dinosaur, and I noticed one of the things that really stuck out to me because of all the stupid traditions Americans do. Maybe this is worldwide. I don't know. I guess this would be Americans, but like the breaking of the wishbone, you know. And I'm still sitting here looking at this dinosaur, and
with a
it has
wishbone.
a wishbone. And I'm like, holy fucking shit, like it's right here. I mean, I could go grab a turkey down the street, bring it back, rip it apart, and say, look, here's millions of years, you know, of connection. And I can't find that in anything in Christianity or
and
any
and
religion as far
now
as, you know.
and now evidence of feathers on some.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, birds and dinosaurs are related. And then if you go to the KU Natural History Museum in Lawrence, Kansas, there is a section where they show the genetic similarity between us and our cousins, the other primates, and we share like 98% of the same DNA. And at what point do you stop lying to yourself and go, I'm exhausted by all this pretending. I'm exhausted by all the fucking apologetics that this is that I have to jump through to try to make this
Right.
work in my head.
Well,
You know,
you either go the path you and I went, which is I choose to follow the evidence, or you stop asking questions. Both are means of easing the exhaustion.
yeah, because it is exhausting.
Yeah.
And so we're
But
having. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, but not questioning it, not opening yourself up to the work of
Yeah,
self-examination is a way of avoiding exhaustion.
that's a good point. Now you've given me something to think about. So we're having pizza in St. Louis. I'm sitting around, and I said, "This is as good as time as an opportunity to talk about this as any, since I'm there with the family." And I said, "Guys, you got to let me know what you want to do." I said, "I'll happily take you to church." And this was at this point for the younger two, but whatever you want. And this was including my wife too. The older kid, she's kind of getting older, so she can kind of do what she has to do. But we all agreed not to go back. It was a family decision, probably one of the first family decisions we've had about anything, where we all mutually just sat down and said, one of any like huge importance, because that was usually driven by probably patriarchal / church things, it filtered down. But this time it was us. Let's us, the unit, make the decision. And yeah, we just decided that we weren't going back. And, eventually my dad passed away in January of this year. It was my first funeral to attend as a non-believer. And I I spoke. I wrote up a nice little speech, eulogy, that referenced God but did not give praise to a thing that I don't believe exists. And um, I shook a few hands and accepted the I'm praying for you. Thank you. I did all that kind of stuff. And honestly, I've had more peace than I've ever had after because I'm just like, oh, you get to this realization that this is the life we have. You're born, you ride it out as long as you can, and then you die, and then you go back to that state at which you were before you were born, whatever that is. And It was better, actually. I think it's better to look at the world and see it for its finiteness. I hope that's a word. Rather than to be, thinking about the future, about what I'll see mom and dad someday. I kinda like it better this way. Yeah, it's more real, that's for
Yeah.
sure.
I think we touched on it in our conversation in episode one, but this idea that if you don't believe in God, then you don't have a sense of wonder or awe,
Mhm. Yeah, yeah.
and I agree, not just in the context of, I've had both my parents die since I've, deconverted.
Mhm.
Um, and so, certainly those are touch points of like, okay, so is not having faith a reasonable way of navigating life? Like, like that's like the
Mhm.
biggest test is the death
Yeah,
of someone you love.
yeah,
And to your point, yeah, it's 100% peaceful knowing that this is a part of this cycle of life. And what makes life meaningful is the fact that it's brief, is the fact that we're not here for very long. It has nothing to
yeah.
do with anything in the Bible or religion. Is not what gives my life meaning. It's the fact that it is temporal, you know,
Mhm.
and that has been comforting.
Not only that, but now I find myself even a little bit more Christian. I mean, I honestly don't think there's one type of Christian. I
What does
think
that
that
mean?
well, I mean, there's there's what the Bible says, and then there's what the Bible thinks it says about what Christian is, and I would say that most people that go to church, what they're being fed is only the good parts. It's never
Mhm.
never talking about the really really bad shit that's in the Bible. That would make you question anyone's loyalty to that, I think. But I find myself caring more about other people, especially people that are different than me. I had different thoughts on trans people when I was a believer, than afterwards. And after I've learned a little bit more information and find out how complex the human body really is, especially whenever it comes to just hormones and genetic makeup and all that kind of stuff. It's like, no, these people aren't broken. They're just different than me,
It's yeah,
and that's okay,
yeah,
you know? Um, what if they're the next step in evolution? Okay,
right.
fine. I mean,
Or
what if
what
that's, you
what
know?
if gender identity is mostly a social construct?
Yeah, it's all made up
You're
stuff. I
right.
mean, yeah. I
Like
mean,
a podcast exploring masculinity or toxic masculinity might be in
yeah.
order.
Well, it may be coming up. Well, stay tuned, right? But, just or walking. I love to walk, and every once in a while see a stupid worm struggling on the concrete because sidewalks aren't really found in nature, and it's struggling. It can't find its way, and I pick it up, toss it, and I go on my way. Different
Yeah.
rules if you're in my house, though. If you're in
Right.
my house, now
Sure.
you're in my territory.
Right, right.
Yeah, sorry, little ants. I try not to step on bugs.
Yeah.
I still eat meat, so I'm not fully there,
Sure.
but it's changed how I look at people. But it's also changed how I look at Christians because that's what I know best, just like you. But I mean, I see similarities in all the other religions too, that the followers don't think. They don't give themselves permission. It's not that they don't think. It's that they don't give themselves permission to ask the question outside of what they've been fed their entire life, or since whatever it is that caused them to believe, which to me it all boils down to belief, believing someone that you trust, that what they tell you is true. People have done something bad. They come to God. They're in prison, and somebody says, "Well, yeah, you probably should have been a better person. How do I be a better person?" Well, yeah, I think it's religion. Oh, okay. And then so they've trusted someone that this is the way I should go. Or, oh, I've had substance abuse problems. Okay, well, never mind that you got addicted to a substance that's designed to be addictive. You're at fault. So what do I do to get past that? Well, you need come to Jesus, go to Allah, whatever. Um, and so, um, all of that boils down to is just somebody that you trust telling you that this is the way. Just like whenever you're indoctrinated in it from a young age. Some people that you trust and, that's what they were led to believe, and so they're telling you. And so, um, I really hope that my hope for the podcast and even sharing my story, hearing your story and everybody else's stories, is just that people give themselves permission to ask questions about what they actually believe. It's like, do you really believe that? Or were you just kind of given it and you had no choice and now it's part of you? I really, um, I troll a little bit on social media, but I've kind of scaled back. I think there is the concept of the angry atheist. I think that's more of a phase for some that have
Mm-hmm.
deconverted, and I feel less angry. I feel more sad, if anything, what I see these days. It's just really,
Wow.
you know.
So you probably moved through the angry phase pretty quickly then, because I feel like I
Oh,
was stuck in that for a while.
yeah, I don't think I moved through it quickly. No,
Yeah.
but I do. Uh, I think I'm actively working to try to remind myself that I used to be like them.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yeah, yeah. The distinction is believe for me as believers, and then like leadership, which is the same distinction I try to make politically. There are people who, vote a certain way, but I don't blame them as much as the leaders who control them or attempt to control
Yeah.
them and influence them. So a lot of my anger after deconversion was geared more towards the church writ large, like
Yeah.
because there are people within leadership who know what you and I know. They,
Hmm.
I've talked to them. When I went through my
Yeah.
Lutheran ministry training, literal quote, we can't talk about that because it will upset too many people. It will basically rock their faith if you talk about some of the things that you and I have talked about.
Right.
Um, that's where my anger sits.
Yeah. Uh, and that's where it gets confusing if you're still a believer and then you say, why are you angry at God? I'm like, I'm not angry at God. I'm angry at the fucking institutions that
Right.
continue to support mythology
Right.
as real. I'm angry at the high control aspects that come out of this that devalue humans. I mean, that you can't do this, that, X, Y, or Z, um, because, my God that I cannot give you any proof for says not to do it. And that's just how I read it. Maybe somebody else down the street reads it differently and they have different rules. And there's no unifier other than, well, can't we all just agree that God exists? Well, no, not necessarily, because other religions have a whole bunch of gods. And then, it just, the only logical conclusion is that this is all made up. You know, that's that's where I come down. And then nowadays I feel compelled, probably because of my upbringing, probably because of the push for evangelicalism, um, to share a point of view that challenges your point of view. That's what I want to do, you know. And um I will probably not agree with anything that believers say to me, because I'm not saying I've heard it all, but there's a lot of repeated talking points that never go away. I'm still open, 1%. I'm 1% open because someone who's driven by facts cannot be completely closed off. I'm just 99% sure that I my investigation has led me to nowhere. So, but if there is
All it would take
some
for
sort of,
me is like pray over somebody who's missing a limb and it regrow. I mean, that
yeah,
I would jump back into church and faith with both feet.
yeah, that would be pretty compelling if it
Yeah.
was right there in front of your
Yeah.
eyes and you could. I mean, and
Pretty
not
simple.
like, yeah, not like. I mean, here. I mean, yes, I'll say yes to that. Although, if you watch some modern magicians,
Yeah, true.
man, these guys are sick, man. They can do
Right.
some pretty
Well,
impressive stuff
we're
and
talking of
really
blinded though, right? Like James Randi level, like, this needs
okay,
to be a medically
controlled environment
controlled.
with
Oh
yeah,
yeah, but
that's true.
none of that would stop the creator of the universe from pulling that off. So,
No. And if the God was real and he really, really wanted to get my attention, I guess he knows exactly what it would take. And for you, it sounds like a leg right in front of you.
yeah,
Maybe somebody you knew your whole life that had some sort of
even
ailment and
better.
then
Yeah.
fixed. Although I've certainly had some conversations with people online, and they're like, "I've seen miracles happen right in front of my eyes," and then and I don't know that story. You could be making that up. You really could believe that you saw that. But I have heard of some other stories of people that went to faith healers and that they had an emotionally driven, like hyped up sense while they were there and went home and died of the illness because it wasn't real. It was just kind of a placebo that was
Sure.
driven by physiological processes.
Right.
And it's like no one ever talks about that. They
Well,
just
no.
you
And why
know
would they? Yeah.
yeah.
That's
So God,
funny.
yeah, God doesn't like.
What would it be for you? What would make you go, I abandon everything that I've come to think and believe?
I used to think it was. I liked funny little quips about like, well, if God wrote my name in the stars while I was driving down the road. But, you could program that with satellites. I mean, it
That's
would
true.
have to
Drones. Yeah.
yeah, there's all I mean, would I believe a personal revelation? Hell no, man. I've taken substances. No. Like, I've heard music that wasn't playing before, thanks to um, the Canon, what is it? Delta 8.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, I had to stop with that stuff. I was like, I'm hearing music that isn't being playing and then texting my kid asking her to like turn it down and she's like, "What are you talking about?" I'm like, "Never
Boy.
mind."
Oh boy.
So so clearly, your mind can um play tricks on you and substances could play tricks on you. I mean, the more I learn just about humans and human psychology, it's amazing what we can work ourselves into, just absolute frenzies. And that's not going away anytime soon, unfortunately. So I do. What do you think about the idea? Are all religions cults? Because that's pretty much kind of where I'm landing at now.
Yeah. And just full disclosure, we kind of had a little side chat on this
Mm-hmm.
topic. I, you know, the definition of cult just shifts depending upon who's using it, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
growing up as a Christian, Mormons were seen as a cult.
Yeah, definitely.
But
I've read books
I
about
it,
all that stuff.
right.
Yeah.
Or Kingdom of the Cults. Speaking of, it
Yes. Yeah.
has
My
every
favorite book.
religion in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Except for
Walter Martin.
Christianity.
Yeah. Except for Christianity. Yeah. So I probably would lean towards no on the surface that are not all cults. Cause I think my definition of cult gets into like the high control territory, and not all religions are high control.
That's true. Yeah.
So I think that would be the defining line. Now, I have been in what I believe to be a couple of cults. They were not churches, they were not religions, but they were affiliated. So the 2 seasons of Shiny Happy People, I've been involved with both of those cults highlighted in each one. I traveled to Europe after high school with Teen Mania, which went on to become a terrible organization.
Yeah.
That's where I met my first wife. And we shortly after that, my wife's family was involved with the Bill Gothard movement, which is the Duggar family stuff. So I married into, I would call it, Gothard light. They used a lot of his teaching. They weren't as hardcore as the Duggars, but both of those situations I would call very cultic. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a discussion worth having.
We should do that.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's do that.
Okay. I think that even if they're not all cults, they all exhibit a cult mindset of there's some level of control, even with the progressive
Sure.
ones. I mean, because they're like, no, everybody else is wrong. We're right. Right. So, and admittedly, I mean, that's where I'm coming from, a point of non-belief. Although, my argument would be that if you look at the default state, whenever you come out of the womb, C-section or whatever, and you come into the world, and you don't know anything. It's not until you get to the point that people can start talking to you, people that you trust, right? That they start telling you what is right, and that's largely dependent on where you grew up and which family you grew up in. So to me, I think the default state is non-belief, and then after that,
Of
prove it.
course. Yeah.
I don't see any other way to look. I mean, that's just how my brain looks at things
I think
from
you're
a
right.
logical view.
The default state is non-belief, but the default state is also to seek explanation.
Yeah.
And so I think for some that becomes, science, and it's not mutually exclusive from religious faith, but they do contradict at some point. I mean, I know we could have a whole discussion about that, but I think the default state is wanting to understand and to have explanations for the world around us. And for some people, religion is enough to scratch that itch. It's just not for me. It's not for you enough.
No, it really, it has fallen flat.
Yeah.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
And so, I wanted to stay just like you.
Yep.
Like we weren't looking for a way out. I didn't just want to sin, whatever that means.
Right.
Sin being sin's definitely a construct. I mean, that's,
Yeah. I was doing that as a Christian. Like that wasn't why I left. I mean, come on.
Yeah. I mean, the only thing that's different from today versus a Sunday as a believer is that you and I are talking. Otherwise, it's been pretty much the same day.
Yep.
So, yeah.
I woke up at 9:00 going, oh, I get to talk to Gene about church stuff without going to church.
Without going to church, yeah. And if there's anything, I do kind of miss the talking deeper about church with other people, at least in person. I don't find online conversation to be terribly good, just because it's just a lot of typing, and sometimes you just can't really truly convey what you're trying to say, and half the time the other person's using ChatGPT to just respond anyway. So I don't know. I hope that there are some relationships in the past that just fell away, and I would love if I could rekindle at least a couple of them if possible.
Yeah.
But so far the efforts have not been good. But and some of that's my fault. Some wasn't. But now I'm trying to build a new, trying to seek community, trying to figure out what the new normal is even still. And that's just a daily thing. But, my evangelical past certainly has prompted me to do things like start a podcast and talk to people. So, I mean, it's better than going up to a mall, somebody in a random mall, and say, if you were to die today, would you go to heaven or hell? Which sadly I've done. I've asked
Have you
that question.
Really? Wow.
Oh, yes.
You and Ray Comfort. Okay.
Yeah. I'm hungry for bananas now. But,
okay, yeah, we could go off on a tangent there.
Yeah.
Well, let's do it again, man. Let's just talk again about stuff. Are you getting comments? Are you getting reviews? Are people starting to hear the podcast?
I mean, I see that I have regular downloads, which is good. I never look at reviews because I never get a notification if there was a review. So, but then I happen to stumble across some, I've gotten some reviews, some at least ratings. That makes me feel good. I mean, I don't care about anything about that. I mean, there's no ads on here. I'm paying for all this myself. I may do a Patreon in the future if anybody wants to ship me a little cash or something. But I just want to get another side of the story out there because it's so heavily dominated by just religious belief. Really, but this is where I think we're on the right side. Why? Because narrow is the gate. There is not a narrow gate than non-believers.
That's
I
lovely.
mean,
I
at
love
least
that.
ones that are, vocal, about it.
Sure.
Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
know, might make some bumper stickers,
Yeah.
narrow is the gate, become
I
an
do
atheist.
listen to a few I listen to a few atheist podcasters who were not raised in the church, and it's very different. It hits differently.
Uh-huh.
I'm
Yeah,
jealous in many ways because they don't have the baggage. So,
yeah.
I think it's a different thing when you, 1, were raised in it, and 2, deconstructed later in life.
Mhm.
Um,
It is a different experience for
it's
sure
it
from the ones I've
yeah,
talked to, and some of
yeah,
those guys are actually angry. I mean,
yeah.
but they're, like, angry atheists from day one because they're like, I see what the world is doing, using this as a tool to, like, control people and make their lives a living hell, and I'm against that,
Yep.
you know?
I'd put
Um,
myself in that camp. We can talk more about that another time too.
yeah.
Listen, this is not my podcast, it's yours, but I
Mhm.
do want to say thank you for taking the time to do an episode so that those who are listening and those who are listening in the future, perhaps a year or 2 from now, are going to hear this for the first time. And um,
Thanks for doing it with me, I
yeah,
appreciate it.
absolutely. It's great to understand why the podcast exists and what your goal is, um, and it's exciting to see how it evolves as it goes along. But yeah, it's great talking to you, Gene.
Thanks, Scott, really appreciate it. You have a good rest of the day.
You too. Bye bye.